Justin and Tiny Mo. A short story by Paul McCann. In the heart of the Glen Glade, around the mystic meadow where the fairies dwell, there was one such fairy who came to be known as we know him as the Tooth Fairy, who once lived inside a hut on the hut stand of old Justin, the mountain man from Drywood Forest. This timid fairy was called Tiny Mo. The other fairies from the mystic meadow danced and pranced among the enchanted plants and flowers that scattered themselves all across the Glen Glade. As Tiny Mo was so timid, he never ever showed himself to any of the other fairy life or the life around the mystic meadow. Tiny Mo spent all his time inside the old man's hut, in fear of ever being seen by anyone. Justin never even knew he had a boarder inside his tweed cap, and if he did, poor Tiny Mo would have been evicted from the linings of his tucked-away haven in such a hurry that there'd be no place for this fairy to lay his head. Tiny Mo remained silent and still in the hut, upon the hut stand of old Justin's mountain home. One bright sunny morning, Justin decided to go for a walk across the meadow and over the stream in search for firewood. As he opened the door, he reached for his old tweed cap, and placing it on his head, out he went into the mystic meadow. Justin walked slowly and carefully across the Glen Glade and waded through the soft water of the trout stream to the pebblestone path that wound its way down the mountain to Drywood Forest. As Justin trod over the stepping stone way by Drywood Forest, he suddenly lost his balance and fell head first into a cluster of buttermilk urns that stood nearby the gate on yonder Vale pasture grounds. Justin's chin hit the gravel and split open. Then his only tooth fell out of his mouth. Off came the tweed cap, and out fell Tiny Mo, the fairy, who sat there, looking up into old Justin's bloody face. Lucky for Tiny Mo, Justin latched on to his cap. Otherwise, the wind would have carried him all the way down the steep pebblestone path into the dense, thick Drywood Forest. Tiny Mo felt very sad for Justin, who sat crying with his only tooth in his wrinkled old hands. Finally, Justin placed the tooth in his pocket and his cap on his baldy bop, and when he returned, he hit the road. With a tip-tap of his old worn-out foot and his open boot. And when he returned back to his little home, Justin fell down upon his old feather bed and went into a deep, deep sleep. The cap rolled off Justin's head as he snored away his hurt and his tears. Tiny Mo felt like he owed Justin a favour for putting him up in his tweed cap for all the years past. So he plucked up the courage and jumped out of the cap and into Justin's pocket, where he hauled out the tooth and lugged it on his shoulder all the way up to Justin's snoring, gaping mouth that opened and shut at regular intervals. At the right moment, Tiny Mo took a step into the jaws of Justin with his tooth under toe for the repair job ahead. But no matter how hard Tiny Mo tried, he just couldn't put back Justin's tooth rightly and tightly into place. As Tiny Mo sat inside Justin's jaw box, he thought and thought what he could do to help his old friend Justin. After some time, Tiny Mo came up with the answer. He would leave a small gift for Justin where he could find it when he woke up. Tiny Mo thought that this would cheer old Justin up, so he left the tooth beside the old man's head and began to look for a small gift. Tiny Mo searched the glen glade and all around the Mystic Meadow until he found a crock of gold at the end of the rainbow that had risen above the mountain top. Tiny Mo carried the crock of gold all the way back to Justin's little cabin and placed it there beside the tooth near the old man's head. Then, just as he got back into the linings of the tweed cap, Justin woke up with a loud yawn and a stretch, a long stretch. Justin felt something under his head, and feeling around, he found his tooth, and beside it the crock of gold, and up he jumped and he began to dance and sing like he had never done before. Oh, Tiny Mo was so happy to see his friend Justin was feeling better now, and tucked himself up safe and snug inside the linings of the tweed cap. Suddenly, on went the tweed cap onto the head of Justin's old baldy bob, and out stepped Justin with a tip and a tap of the boot and the foot to yonder Vale village. Justin walked into yonder Vale village, slowly made his way up to the local store, and with his cap in his hand, he pushed open the door of the store and said to the storekeeper, "What can you trade me this time for food, old man?" Justin laughed, and he took out a pencil and a piece of paper and walked around and across to the counter, and the storekeeper looked at Justin. "What did you say, old fool?" Justin just laughed. What can you trade me for food? What can you trade me? That's what you always say to me. Said Justin, laughing with scorn in the voice. You all right? You feeling all right, old man? Said the storekeeper. And he continued, "What do you need, old man? A piece of paper and a pencil? You're walking around here like you own the store. Seems like you've come a long way. Maybe the heat's got to you." A few other in the people started to take notice of the conversation. Some laughed as well with the storekeeper. A few pointed the finger at Justin. Justin just kept his face straight and began to write down on a piece of paper some of the things that he wanted from the shop. As he wrote down, a few people started to taunt old Justin. "It's a wonder he can see, never mind right after all those years living alone on top of the mountain." But Justin just kept on writing. Maybe old Justin is making out his last will and testament, leaving all of his debts to the entire village. Everyone joined in the laughter. The storekeeper joined in too. But Justin just handed the note over to the storekeeper and said, "Here are the supplies I'll be needing this time, and I'll pay cash for this, and the entire bill. I'll square up any debt that I have with you, storekeeper." Silence fell all around as Justin took a few pieces of gold from his small crock of gold that hung from the belt around his waist. "I hope that this is enough to pay for my bill," said Justin as he handed over a handful of gold to the shopkeeper. There was shock written all over the face of every single one that saw the gold. It was hard for some to accept the fact that old Justin was very rich, and they all began to scorn him and said, "I suppose you're going to tell us that the fairies gave you this gold." Justin looked away and placed the tweed cap upon his head. As soon as the cap was on his head, little Tiny Mo whispered into Justin's left ear, "Tell them a fairy gave you a gift because you lost your tooth." Justin could hardly believe his ear. Tiny Mo repeated what he had said and added, "Take off your cap and place it on the counter along with the crock of gold, and ask anyone here who doesn't believe you to put their money where their mouth is, and you shall cover all their wages. I'm a friend, and please do as I tell you, old man. Don't worry, just do it now." Justin took off his cap and did as the voice in his ear had told him to do. After a short period, the counter was overflowing with money. Deeds of houses and documents, IOU notes and fancy goods. And Justin had covered every one of their wagers. Everything Justin owned was on the line: his crock of gold, his little home in the mountain, and all of his last worldly belongings. All the village had gathered in the store by now to see the proof of the tooth fairy that supposedly came from Mystic Meadow. And then, suddenly, out from Justin's old tweed cap jumped Tiny Mo, and he danced and pranced all around the counter of the little shop like the sunshine upon a running river in the spring, and all of the lookers-on ran out of the shop in fear, and as the fury of the Glen Glade fairy spent itself at their expense, eyes were popping out of everybody's heads, and people were passing out in the shop, and Justin was scooping up all of his winnings into the tweed cap and pockets and whatever else he could put them into, and what never ever went into the cap was stuffed down the trouser pockets and coat pockets and everywhere there was an available space. Justin left the store as the new owner and landlord of every single dwelling in yonder vale, and every place of business now belonged to Justin. For Justin now was a very, very wealthy man, and was respected as the years passed in the village of yonder vale. And the village was now a major town, and all the residents of Justin's Justice still leave their tooth under the pillows at night in the hope of a reward from the tooth fairy from the Mystic Meadow. Tiny Mo is now timid no more, and spread the news to all the fairies around about the tooth and the fortune that it brought to Justin's Justice. And now there's not a person who talks of the folk who once lived in yonder vale village, for their shame is long gone, and so are all the people who remember it. And to this very day, everyone who believes strongly enough is rewarded. This identity of the very first Tooth Fairy is just as I was told by an old man from the mountain top, who still refuses to give his name, but told me the entire story was the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The